Because I don't need someone to save me. I need a chance to rebuild myself. She said it to a room full of Hell's Angels. No trembling. Apology. Just a 27-year-old woman with nothing left to lose standing in front of men who had seen everything and choosing to stand anyway. The moment changed her life forever. And it might just change the way you see people you've been told to fear. If this is your first time here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button and follow Emma's story all the way to the end. Drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from to see how far this story travels. The sign was hand-painted. Black letters on a weathered board, nailed crookedly to the doorframe like someone had done it in a hurry and never bothered to fix it afterward. Wanted. 2 words, no phone number, no qualifications listed. Just 2 words and a door that looked like it had absorbed 30 years of hard living into its grain. Carter stood on the sidewalk in front of Black Vulture Roadhouse and read those 2 words 4 times. Behind her, the town of Ridgecrest, Arizona, went about its late Tuesday morning like she wasn't there. Pickup truck rattled past on the cracked asphalt. A woman with a grocery bag on each arm crossed the street without looking up. The gas station attendant 2 blocks down was leaning against the pump, the same way he leans against it every day, like the pump was the only thing keeping him upright. He had walked past this bar 3 times in the last week. Each time she told herself she was going somewhere else. Every time she'd circled back. She had $43 in her checking account. It was due in 11 days. When she had filled out 16 job applications in the past month, coffee shops, grocery stores, Zanny's, a pet supply warehouse on the edge of town, and had received back exactly 0 callbacks. Her credit card was maxed. Her car insurance had lapsed. The refrigerator in her apartment held half a carton of eggs, a jar of salsa, and the specific kind of emptiness that you feel in your chest more than your stomach. He had been standing outside Black Vulture Roadhouse for 6 minutes when the door opened and a man came out. He was not a small man. He was not the kind of man you looked at and then looked away from easily. He stood well over 6 feet, with shoulders that suggested a lifetime of physical work, and he wore the kind of leather vest that Emma had been warned about her entire life. On the back was the one everyone in Ridgecrest knew, the skull with the winged helmet, the name arcing above it in bold letters. He had gray streaking through his beard and through the longer hair that curled slightly at his collar, and he had the kind of eyes that had seen a lot and decided long ago not to be surprised by most of it. He stopped when he saw her standing there. Emma didn't move. He looked at the sign. He looked at her. Something shifted in his expression, not hostility, not warmth, exactly like assessment. "You need something?" he said. His voice was the kind of voice that expected honest answers. "I'm here about the sign." He looked at it again, as though confirming it still said what it had always said. And he looked back at her. "You know what kind of place this is? You know who runs it?" "Yes." A pause that stretched long enough to be uncomfortable. "Inside," he said, and went back through the door. Followed him. The interior of Black Vulture Roadhouse was exactly what you would expect, and nothing like what you had been told to fear. It was old, hardwood, scuffed and darkened by decades of boot traffic. The bar itself was a long slab of polished wood, genuinely beautiful. Actually, in the way that old things become beautiful when they've been maintained by someone who cared about them. The shelves behind it were organized. The bottles were labeled. The glasses were clean. There were 4 men inside at that hour. 2 sat at the bar with coffee mugs, actual coffee mugs, not beers, because it was 11 in the morning. 1 was in a back booth with what looked like a ledger book open in front of him, a pen in his hand. The 4th was behind the bar, polishing a section of the counter with a rag. One of them looked up when Emma walked in. Every one of them was wearing the vest. The man who had let her in walked behind the bar and set both hands flat on the surface and looked at her. "Callahan," he said. "I run this place. What's your name?" "Carter." "You from here?" "Originally from Flagstaff. Been in Ridgecrest about 8 months." "What kind of work have you done?" "Office administration. Some bookkeeping. Waitressing through college. I've done inventory management." She paused. One, I'm a fast learner for anything I haven't done. Marcus didn't write anything down. He didn't. He just watched her. Why do you want to work here, Emma Carter? And she told him the truth. She hadn't planned to. Planned to say something professional and measured. Something about seeking new opportunities in a fast-paced environment. But standing in that bar with four men watching her and nothing left to lose behind her, the honest answer came out instead. Clean and simple and entirely without self-pity. Because I don't need someone to save me, I need a chance to rebuild myself. The man in the back booth looked up from his ledger. The man behind the bar stopped polishing. Marcus Callahan looked at Emma for a long moment. At her. You're not afraid of us, he said. It wasn't quite a question. I'm afraid of a lot of things, Emma said. You don't think you're one of them? Something moved across Marcus's face. Brief, and she wasn't entirely sure what it was. He picked up his coffee mug and took a slow drink. Back down. You got references? I have a former employer in Flagstaff. I'll answer if you call. What happened to your last job? Question she had been preparing for. She gave him the short version, not the whole truth. Not yet, but nothing. False. I worked for in Flagstaff. Downsized. I relocated, hoping for better prospects. It's been a slower start than I expected. Marcus nodded slowly, as if filing this away. The pay is $14 an hour to start, plus tips. Tuesday through Saturday, 11 to close. Handle bar service, table service, some food prep during the lunch hours. And keep your section clean and your accounts straight. You don't talk about club business. You don't ask about things that aren't your business. You treat everyone who comes through that door the same. Doesn't matter who they are or what they look like. He set his mug down. You want the job? Emma said, yes. He looked at her a second longer. You start Thursday. She walked out of Black Vulture Roadhouse and made it exactly half a block before she stopped walking and pressed her back against the wall of the building next to her and exhaled. Hands were shaking. She hadn't realized they were shaking. She pressed them flat against warm stucco and breathed until they stopped. She had a job. She had actually walked into that bar and walked out with a job. The phone buzzed. In her pocket, she looked at the screen and felt the good feeling drain out of her immediately. Text from a number she hadn't blocked yet, because some part of her brain kept insisting that blocking was too final, too definitive, though she knew that was exactly the kind of thinking that had kept her in a bad situation for too long. The text said, I heard you're still in Ridgecrest. You should talk. Daniel Whitmore, her ex, the man she had driven 8 hours to get away from, specifically so she would not have to hear from him again. For 5 seconds. She stared at the text for 5 seconds. Then she put her phone in her pocket without responding and started walking back toward her apartment. She had a job. She was going to focus on that. Tuesday morning. Gone. Showed up at Black Vulture Roadhouse at 10:40. Evening. 15 minutes early in black jeans and a dark blue shirt and the best boots she owned. She had spent 40 minutes the night before reading everything she could find about the difference between various whiskeys, refreshing her memory on cocktail basics and reminding herself of what she knew about inventory tracking systems. When she knocked on the door, it was opened by a man she hadn't seen on Tuesday, which was younger than Marcus, she would later learn. He was 40 with dark hair cut short and a beard that was maintained but not fussed over, and tattoos that covered both arms from the wrists up into his sleeves. He had the same vest. He looked at her with the kind of expression that didn't give away anything at all. He said yes. Ryan Walker. He didn't extend a hand, stepped back to let her in. Marcus said, you'd be starting today. He had something to handle this morning. I'll show you where things are. He followed him behind the bar. Ryan Walker was not unfriendly. He was also not friendly, precise and efficient in the way he showed her things, the register system, organization, Zoff, the back storage area, and the simple food prep setup for the lunch menu of sandwiches and bar snacks that the Roadhouse offered. He explained without embellishing. He answered questions without expanding beyond the answer. When she asked a question he thought she should be able to figure out herself, his pause before responding was long enough that she felt it. Reply. Delivery comes Mondays, he said. You'll need to check it against the order sheet and log any discrepancies before you sign off on it. One. Do you have a standard format for logging discrepancies? He looked at her. What do you mean? A form, a spreadsheet kind of system for tracking when what arrives doesn't match what was ordered. Expression didn't change. We write it on the order sheet. Then what happens to the order sheet? It goes in the drawer. Nodded. Does anyone go back and look at the drawer? Longer pause. Sometimes. Okay, she said. I'm just asking because if there's a pattern of shortages from the same supplier, you'd want to know that. We can talk about it later. What else? Ryan studied her for a moment with an expression that was impossible to read. Then he continued the walkthrough. By the time the doors opened at 11, Emma had a rough map of the place in her head and an understanding of the basics. She had served 8 people, gotten the order right on everyone, cleared, and reset 3 tables without being told to. Tucson. At 12:30, a group of 5 men came in, wearing the vest, lay loud and talking over each other. Taking the longest table in the middle of the room. Watched Ryan for a signal. His body language told her these were known people, comfortable people, not a situation to be cautious about. She picked up her pad and went to their table. One of them, a broad man with a shaved head and a grin that seemed to operate independently of whatever mood he was actually in, looked up at her with obvious surprise. He said, "Started today," Emma said. "Can I get you?" "Where's Dougie?" "I don't know who that is." "Once. I started today." The man with the shaved head, whose name she would later learn was Hatchet, for reasons she never asked about, looked at his table companions with an expression that was half amusement and half something else. "Is actually hired someone?" "Looks like," said one of the others. Isn't. Hatchet looked back at Emma. He leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms and looked at her the way people look at things they're deciding whether to take seriously. "You know who we are. Your customers," Emma said. "Do you know what you want to drink?" Hatchet stared at her. The grin that had been operating independently seemed to actually connect to something genuine underneath it. And he laughed, a surprised laugh. "I like her," he said to the table. He looked back at Emma. 5 Budweisers and whatever the lunch special is. There's no lunch special listed on the board. There never is. Just ask whoever's in back what they made. Emma went to the back. Dan was there, leaning against the prep counter, eating a sandwich. It's his table. Wants to know the lunch. Chili. It's always chili on Thursdays. You should probably put that on the board. And looked at her. The board has been the same since 2017, Emma said, and went back out to Hatchet's table. First week was an education in a language she hadn't known she was signing up to learn. Assant, language of the motorcycle club. She understood quickly that this was a subject she would not be exploring unless invited when she was not invited. The language of the place itself. Every bar has its own language, its own rhythms, its own unstated rules about how things work and who gets treated which way and what you never say out loud. Black Vulture Roadhouse had layers of that more than most. You learned that the corner booth on the left was Marcus's booth, and you did not seat other customers there without being certain he wouldn't need it. One. She learned that a particular older man named Gerald, who came in every weekday at 2 o'clock and ordered a ginger ale and a club sandwich, was treated with absolute courtesy by everyone in the room. On her own, and she figured had lost his wife recently, and this was how he was getting through his days, and she made sure his ginger ale was refilled without him having to ask. She learned that the jukebox was free between 11 and 5 and cost $1 per song after that, and that there was one song on it that nobody played, and she didn't need to be told which song it was because the energy of the room told her. She learned that Ryan Walker came in every day that she worked, whether or not he seemed to have a specific purpose for being there. He sat at the bar. He drank black coffee in the morning and switched to water in the afternoon. He watched things the way people watch things when watching is the way they understand the world. The third day, he said, "Everyone," while she was restocking the shelf behind the bar, "Everyone, you made an error on the Tuesday register." Stopped. "What kind of error?" You comped a drink you shouldn't have. The older couple at table 4. The woman said the beer was warm, but it wasn't. She just wanted it colder than we serve it. Emma said, I comped it anyway. Ryan was quiet for a moment. Why? Emma turned around and looked at him. Because it cost us $4 and it made her feel heard. When she tipped 12 on a $30 check, so we came out ahead. She paused. Problem. Ryan held her gaze. No, he said, asking. He went back to his coffee. Emma went back to the shelf and went still. But she noticed after that he watched her less like someone watching for a problem and more like someone watching something they were still figuring out what to make of. Situation with Daniel Whitmore had started 3 years ago, and explaining it in full would take longer than it deserved. Version. The short version she'd been 24, only graduated, zest, picking her first real job at an architectural firm in Phoenix. Everyone was 12 years older when she met a man and very certain of himself and very certain of her. And the certainty had felt at the time like security. Bacon. Like being wanted in a way that had weight to it. It took her the better part of 2 years to understand that the weight was not security. The weight was control. Daniel didn't shout. That was the thing people always seemed to expect when she tried to explain it, and the explanation always lost something when it had to begin with that. Hit. He didn't threaten, he simply arranged things. Arranged it so that her social life, gradually life, narrowed to people he approved of. He arranged it so that her work opportunities subtly stalled, though she didn't connect those two things until much later. Arranged it so that her sense of her own judgment became something she trusted less and less every time she made a decision independently because something went wrong in a way that he could gently, reasonably point to afterward. The time she left. When she had lost her job, both her apartment, of which had been entangled with him in ways she had noticed while they were happening most of her savings, and the specific part of her personality that had once been capable of walking into a room and knowing she belonged there. She had driven to Ridgecrest because it was 8 hours from Phoenix, and she had a former college friend who had mentioned the town once years ago. The entire reasoning. It was not a plan. It was a direction. 8 months of scraping and regrouping had gotten her to the point where she was functional. And she had an apartment small. The heat worked inconsistently, but hers. She rebuilt enough of her bookkeeping skills to understand she could find work if she could find someone willing to give her a chance. She built enough of herself to know that she was not what Daniel had spent 2 years trying to convince her she was. She had not fully believed that yet. Not in the place where belief actually lives. Is what made Thursday of her first week so significant, though she wouldn't understand it until much later. 2 in the afternoon, the quietest part of the day, had come in around noon, taken his corner booth with a cup of coffee and what appeared to be paperwork, and had spoken to Emma exactly once to tell her the coffee was good today. Of the regular afternoon crowd were at the bar. Was in his usual spot with his ginger ale. A woman came in. It was roughly Emma's age, maybe a few years older, with the kind of look that took work to maintain and the kind of expression that suggested she was accustomed to that work, paying off in rooms full of people. One found. She looked around the bar the way tourists look at things they're deciding aren't worth their time. She walked to the bar and sat down and looked at Emma. "A soda," she said. "And is this place always this dark?" "Lighting's consistent," Emma said, and made her drink. The woman took it and looked around again. "I honestly cannot believe people spend time here voluntarily." She said it just loud enough to be a statement rather than a private thought. The men at the bar, a heavy-set man named Cliff, who came in every afternoon and was not affiliated with the club. Just a regular who had been coming since before Emma existed, shifted on his stool. "He's making you stay," he said pleasantly. The woman looked at him with an expression that suggested she found this response inadequate. He looked at Emma. "You actually work here?" "I do," Emma said. "Find it." She waved a hand concerning. "Given who runs this place," set her bar rag down. She kept her voice even and her expression neutral. who run this place, gave me a job when I needed one, treated me with respect. That's my experience. My experience, the woman said, is that organizations like this exist because legitimate society failed them. She said it with the satisfied tone of someone who has thought carefully about a thing and is now delivering the conclusion. The bar was quiet for a moment. From the corner booth, without looking up from his paperwork, Marcus said, a generous way of putting it. The woman looked over at him. Apparently, she hadn't noticed him there. Just looked up then. He took in her expression. He smiled slightly, which was not an entirely reassuring thing on his face. Most of the men in this club grew up in places where the institutions that were supposed to protect people didn't. The legitimate avenues that were supposed to be available weren't. You're not wrong that something failed. You're just wrong about what the conclusion should be. He went back to his paperwork. Enjoy your drink. On. The woman finished her vodka soda faster than she'd probably intended to and left without leaving a tip, which Emma had already anticipated and did not take personally. In his corner, caught Emma's eye and gave her a small nod of acknowledgement. She nodded back. The end of Emma's first hike arrived on a Saturday evening that was busier than any night she'd yet worked. When the music was up, the bar was full. It was moving constantly drinks, food in tables, clearing tables and making change, managing 3 simultaneous conversations with customers. And somewhere around 9 in the evening, she was behind the bar, mixing a round of drinks when she became aware of a particular kind of attention in the room. Not loud attention. The quiet kind. The kind that means something has shifted. She looked up. A man was standing at the entrance, wearing a suit that cost more than Emma's monthly rent. And he stood with the particular posture of a man who was accustomed to being the most important person in any room he entered. He was not large, but he carried himself as though he were. He had a face that was handsome, in the precise, constructed way of men who treat their appearance as a business asset. Knew that face. She had spent 2 years learning every expression it was capable of making. She set the bottle down carefully. She kept her hands on the bar. Whitmore scanned the room with the systematic patience of a man who was confident he would find what he was looking for. His eyes traveled the room. They found Emma. And the expression on his face shifted into something she recognized, that particular combination of satisfaction and ownership that she had once incomprehensibly taken for affection. He didn't move toward her immediately. He simply stood there, making sure she had seen him, making sure she knew he had found her, making sure she understood what his presence meant. Just a moment, less than a second, but present. Emma felt it, the old response, the pull toward smallness. The instinct trained into her over 2 years to make herself quieter, simpler, easier to manage. Then Ryan Walker, who was sitting at the far end of the bar and had his back to the door, turned around. He looked at Emma first. Whatever he read in her face made him turn further to look at the door. He looked back at Emma. "You know him?" Ryan asked. Just for her. Emma said, "Yes." Ryan nodded once. He didn't move immediately. He just looked at her, waiting. And she understood, without him saying so, that the next move was hers to make, that he wasn't going to handle this for her unless she asked him to, and he wasn't going to ignore it either. He was simply making sure she knew that the option existed. Straightened up. She picked up the bottle she had set down. She finished making the round of drinks she'd been working on. She set them on a tray and slid the tray to Hatchet, the one who was standing nearby, and said quietly, "It's like table 6, And then she stepped out from behind the bar. She walked toward the door. She stopped 6 feet from Daniel Whitmore and looked at him, his low voice. Vance, when she spoke, was steady. "Should leave," she said. Daniel smiled, the practiced kind. "It's good to see you. I just want to talk." "You do? Leave anyway." The smile stayed put, good at keeping the smile in place.
"I heard you were working somewhere new."
"I wanted to see how you were doing. That's all. You drove 8 hours to check on me in the area. You were never in this area in your life." "Daniel." He took a small step forward. Not aggressive, he was never aggressive in ways that registered as aggressive. Incremental. The way he had always moved toward her, until she realized one day that she had nowhere left to step back to. Being dramatic, he said. We were together for 2 years. When I think we at least owe each other a conversation. We don't owe each other anything, Emma said. Emma. He lowered his voice to the register he used when he wanted to sound like reason itself, like the only calm person in the room. Look at this place. You're a smart woman. You deserve better than. She said, leave. The voice came from behind Emma. She didn't turn around. She knew the voice. Marcus Callahan stepped up beside her, not in front of her, not shielding her. Beside her, it was a specific choice, and it read as one. Daniel Whitmore looked at Marcus, and the calculation that moved through his eyes was visible. Assessing. He was the kind of man who was always assessing. Just having a conversation with someone I know, Daniel said. He said, she see leave, Marcus said. In this building, that's the end of the conversation. Daniel's smile thinned. I'm not sure you understand who I am. And you're standing in my bar after someone who works for me asked you to leave. Marcus's voice carried no anger, no threat, nothing excessive. The flat certainty of a man who had never in his adult life been unsure of where the line was. That's all I need to understand. The room was completely quiet, was still playing, but the room had gone to that particular stillness that happens when every person in it is paying attention to one thing. Daniel looked around. He was smart enough to read the room, even if reading it required him to acknowledge things he would rather not have acknowledged. He looked back at Emma. This isn't over, he said quietly. Emma held his gaze. Yes, it is, she said. Get home, Daniel. He left. The door closed. For a moment, nobody moved. And Hatchet said, from somewhere behind her, somebody want to tell me what that was about. The ordinary sound of the room came back. Everyone, the music reasserting itself, conversation resuming at every table, today evening, continuing as though it had never paused. Walked back behind the bar. Her hands were shaking again. And she pressed them flat against the counter. She had pressed them flat against the stucco outside a week ago. And she breathed, and after a moment they stopped. And Walker was at his place at the end of the bar. He picked up his water glass and took a drink and set it back down. He didn't say anything. He didn't look at her with pity or with the particular expression people get when they know they just witnessed something significant and want credit for having been present. Tense. He just sat there, the way he always sat there, and the ordinariness of it was the most comforting thing in the room. For a moment, Emma picked up her bar rag and went back to work. Shaking stopped by the time the last customer left that Saturday night. Wiped down the bar in long, even strokes, the same motion she had repeated 100 times over the past week, and she told herself that the steadiness in her hands meant something. It was evidence of something real. She had faced him. She had said leave, and he had left. And she was still standing in the same place she had been, standing before he walked through that door. Count for something. Marcus was the last one there besides her, back in his corner booth with what remained of his coffee, not looking at her, not making a production of still being present. It's just there, the way a solid wall is there, not intrusive, not demanding, simply a fact of the room. Finished the bar and started on the tables. He said, without looking up, Zest, you don't have to talk about it, she said. But if you need to, it doesn't leave this room. She carried a stack of glasses to the back and set them in the rack and stood there for a moment in the relative quiet of the storage area. Pressed her palms flat against the metal shelf and looked at the middle distance and thought about what it meant that the most uncomplicated kindness she had received in 8 months had come from a man in a Hell's Angels vest in a bar. One in town had told her not to walk into. She went back out and continued with the tables. His name is Daniel Whitmore, she said, at Marcus. Just talking, the way you talk when you need the words outside your head. Together in Phoenix for about 2 years. Said nothing. He was listening. He was listening in the way that people listen when they've learned that silence is the right container. He He's not, he never hit me. I want to be clear about that because people always expect that part. She set a chair up on a table. Another. He just arranged things until I couldn't recognize what I'd walked into. Quiet for a moment. I drove here because it was 8 hours away and I had nowhere better to go, Emma said. It's not a plan. That's just a direction. Most people start with a direction, Marcus said. The plan comes after. The plan comes. She looked at him then. He was still looking at his paperwork, or at least at the table in front of him, giving her the privacy of not being looked at while she said the things that needed saying. Small thing. It was also exactly the right thing. Did you hire me? She asked. He looked up at that, considered her for a moment, because you walked in when everyone told you not to. And you answered my question honestly, instead of telling me what you thought I wanted to hear. He picked up his coffee. It's rarer than you'd think. Emma pulled her jacket off the hook behind the bar and thought about that on the walk home. The October air was cool enough to feel like something. And her boots made a sound on the empty sidewalk. That was the only sound for blocks in either direction. She thought about rare. She thought about Daniel standing in that doorway with his careful smile and his 8-hour drive. And she thought about what it meant that he had come. He's been a man, who kept track of his things, didn't like loose ends, who needed to know that what he believed he had wouldn't simply disappear without his permission. She had disappeared without his permission, and he had come to remind her that he hadn't given it. She pulled her phone out of her pocket. The unread texts from him had accumulated to 4 since Saturday evening. She didn't open them. She blocked the number. Then she stood on the sidewalk and thought about the fact that she should have done that months ago. And the only reason she hadn't was the same reason she had stayed 2 years longer than she should have, the belief into her so gradually she couldn't point to, when it had arrived, that his reactions were her responsibility. She put her phone back in her pocket and kept walking. She was done being responsible for Daniel Whitmore's reactions. Sunday was her day off. She spent it at the library, which was free and warm and full of the specific, comfortable silence of a place where nobody expected anything from you. She pulled up spreadsheet software on one of the public computers and built a basic inventory tracking template. Nothing elaborate. A clean system for logging deliveries against orders, flagging discrepancies, and building a month-over-month comparison that would show patterns if patterns existed. She saved it to a thumb drive she had bought at the gas station for $3 and went home and ate scrambled eggs and read a book she had found on the free shelf by the front door, a mystery set in New England. The pages soft with other people's handling. And for the first time she couldn't remember how long. The inside of her apartment felt like somewhere she had chosen to be, rather than somewhere she had ended up. Morning, she showed up at Black Vulture Roadhouse before the delivery arrived. When she knocked, Ryan was there. He opened the door with the same expression he always had, which was to say the expression that gave away nothing. Don't open for 2 hours, he said. I know. The supply delivery comes Mondays. I want to see how the current system works before I suggest anything different. He looked at her for a moment. Then he stepped back to let her in. Delivery arrived at 9:15. A truck from the regional distributor carrying 3 weeks of bar supplies of beer and liquor and mixers and the cleaning supplies and bar napkins and other sundry items that a working bar consumed in quantity. A young man named Pete, who clearly knew the route well, wheeled everything in on a dolly while Ryan checked items against the order sheet. Stood beside Ryan and watched. She kept her mouth shut. Was there to learn the system, not to correct it in real time, and she understood the difference. At the end of the delivery, she had identified 3 items on the order sheet that didn't match what had arrived, 2 cases of a specific bourbon short, and a cleaning supply substituted with a different brand. Ryan noted them on the order sheet in the margin, initialed it, and put the sheet in the drawer under the register. Then does that happen? Emma asked. The shortages? Ryan was breaking down the empty boxes. Weeks, there's something. And you've been cording it on the sheet and putting the sheets in the drawer. That's how it's done. Have you ever pulled the sheets and looked at whether it's the same items coming up short. Ryan stopped with a flattened cardboard box in his hands. He looked at her. What are you saying? I'm saying I'd like to pull whatever sheets you have, going back as far as they go, if that's all right, and see if there's a pattern. Quiet for a moment. Then he walked to the register, opened the drawer, and pulled out a rubber-banded stack of papers that was thick enough to suggest a year or more of consistent record keeping. He set it on the bar. Knock yourself out, he said, and went back to breaking down boxes. Emma took the stack to a table and sat down and went through it methodically. She built a tally on a legal pad as she went item. Frequency, whether the shortage had been credited by the distributor or simply absorbed. Time she reached the bottom of the stack, she had a clear picture. The same bourbon brand had come up short 14 times in 18 months. The credit had been issued twice. The other 12 instances, roughly $400 in product, had been absorbed without follow-up. She sat with that for a moment. Then she went to find Ryan. He was behind the bar, restocking from the delivery. She set the legal pad on the bar in front of him without saying anything and waited. He looked at it. He picked it up. He read through her tally slowly. His jaw shifted once, slightly. The way a jaw shifts when someone is absorbing something they don't entirely like absorbing. 15 times, he said. 14 times, credited twice. You've absorbed roughly 400 in product that you paid for and didn't receive. The same distributor. From the same distributor. We want to know if it's the same driver on those delivery days, because if it is, the problem is more specific than the company. Ryan set the legal pad down. He looked at her. The expression on his face was not the careful blankness she'd been getting for a week. It was something more direct. Something that was trying to make up its mind. "We did this morning," he said. He looked at the clock, 2.5 hours. Records were already there. I just organized them. Nobody organized them before. I know. He picked up the legal pad again and looked at it, and Emma had the sense that he was not really looking at the numbers anymore. He was thinking about something else. "I'll bring this to Marcus," he said. "It's appropriate. It's his business." Ryan looked at her with the direct expression again, the one that was deciding something. "You care," he said. It wasn't a challenge. It was a genuine question. Emma thought about it honestly. "Because someone gave me a chance when I needed one," she said. The idea of someone taking advantage of that. Ryan Walker nodded once. Then he picked up the Montalo pad and went to find Marcus. Response to the inventory documentation was quiet and direct and immediate. He called the distributor that afternoon. Conversation was not heated, because Marcos Callahan was not a man who needed heat to be effective. Emma would learn. Far more effective at room temperature, the particular calm of a man who is not angry but is also absolutely not moving. Short shit, credits that had been denied were re-examined. Three of the 12 instances were credited within the week. The question of the delivery driver was investigated internally by the distributor. Never learned exactly what the outcome of that was, because it was not her business to know, and she understood that. What she did learn, the following Thursday, is what it felt like. When Marcus walked behind the bar at noon, a cup of coffee, in front of her without being asked, and said, "Everyone, you did good work on that inventory thing." 8 words. It was succinct. She felt them somewhere specific in her chest, in the place that had been empty for a while. She said, "Ryan says you suggested checking the driver rotation, like a relevant variable." Marcus picked up his own coffee and leaned against the back of the bar the way he did when he was settling in for a conversation. "Did you learn bookkeeping?" "Community college, and then on the job. I worked for a small architectural firm in Phoenix. We did our own administrative work. You like it? The numbers?" I considered this. "I like when things make sense," she said. "Either add up or they don't. There's no arguing with them." He looked at her with an expression she was beginning to recognize as thoughtful interest, the specific kind that came from a man who paid attention to the gap between what people said and what they meant. "Spent some time somewhere that didn't make sense," he said. It wasn't a question. She didn't treat it like one. Yes, he nodded. Bars got more of those records. Going back further, if you wanted to look at them, we wouldn't be opposed. He set down her coffee. How far back do the records go? That they probably tell a story. I'll start this weekend, she said. The story the records told was not a dramatic one. The slow, ordinary story of a business that had been run on instinct and loyalty, rather than system, which was fine for a place where everyone trusted everyone else. It created the kind of gradual bleeding that didn't hurt until it had gone on long enough to matter. Redundant orders that had never been consolidated. Preferred suppliers, charging rates that hadn't been renegotiated in 6 years. Operating costs that could be reduced without affecting anything the customers would notice. Organize what she found into a simple document. Presentation she knew better than to walk in with something that looked like a corporate performance review. Clear accounting of where the money was going and where small adjustments could stop it from going unnecessarily. Brought it to Marcus on a Tuesday morning when the bar was quiet. She set it on his table and stood back and let him read it without hovering. Slowly, he turned the pages without rushing, back to the second page twice. When he finished, he looked up at her, telling me, "We're leaving about $800 a month on the table to 9, and that's conservative." I didn't include the distributor discrepancy because you're already handling that. Set the papers down. He pressed 2 fingers against his mouth and looked at the table for a moment. He looked at Emma. "Who else have you shown this to?" "No one. Why not? It's your business. You should see it first." He held her gaze for a long moment. "What do you want in return for this?" It once surprised her not because it was inappropriate, but because she hadn't framed it that way in her own thinking. She considered it. "Nothing beyond what we agreed on," she said. "Just part of the job. This is not part of the job I hired you for. But it's part of the job the place needs." She paused. "I'm not trying to step on anything. If you want me to stay in my lane, tell me, and I'll stay there." She stopped, tried again. "I'm good at this." Told I'm good at a lot of things, and then watched the situations that told me that fall apart. You want to be somewhere that uses what I actually have. That's all. Marcus Callahan looked at Emma Carter for a long time. The bar was quiet around them. Somewhere in the back, someone was moving boxes, the particular rhythmic sound of productive work being done without drama. "Bring this to the table," he said. "The relevant people will see it. We'll talk about your role here." Emma nodded and picked up her order pad and went back to work. It was Ryan who told her what the table conversation had produced, and he did it in the most Ryan Walker way possible, which was to drop it into a conversation about something else entirely. She was behind the bar on a Friday afternoon, and he was on his usual stool, and working through a bottle of water, and she was restocking the speed rack when he said, preamble, "Dak just wants you to take over the ordering." His hands stopped. "The supply ordering, all of it. Supply ordering, delivery verification, vendor contact. You'd keep the bar work. We're short-staffed on floor coverage, but the back office side would be yours to run." He turned around. "What did the others say about that?" His expression did something that might, on a different face, have been called almost a smile. "Hatchett said you were the best hire Marcus had made in 5 years. Dougie said any woman who could stand in front of Daniel Whitmore without flinching could stand in front of a vendor without flinching." Most of them said approximately the same. Emma felt something move through her that she recognized after a moment as pride. Defensive. Not the defensive kind that she'd had to manufacture over the past months just to keep herself upright. Kind. The kind that came from the outside in. "Marcus, yes," she said. "Tell him I'll have a new ordering system ready by next Monday." Ryan picked up his water glass. "He figured you'd say that." He paused. Ethan figured you'd have it ready by Sunday. "He told me to tell you there's no rush and Monday is fine." Turned back to the speed rack. "Sunday," she said. Ryan didn't respond, but she heard the almost sound of not quite laughter behind her, and it was the first genuinely light moment she had shared with him, and it felt like something small cracking open. Hatchett was the one who explained the dynamic to her. because Hatchet was constitutionally incapable of allowing things to go unexplained when he had an opinion about them. At the bar on a Saturday afternoon, not his whole group this time, just him, and two others talking quietly about something she wasn't listening to. And when the others left briefly to use the back, he turned to Emma with the directness of a man who considered social filtering to be someone else's problem. And hasn't liked an outsider in 6 years, he said. Set down what she was doing and looked at him. I'm sorry. The last person he gave the time of day to who wasn't already club was his ex-wife. It was 6, 7 years back. Hatch picked up his beer. He doesn't trust easy. Most of us don't. That's not a character flaw. That's pattern recognition. When you spend enough time watching people's true colors come out after they've already gotten comfortable, you stop giving comfortable to people who haven't earned it. Waited because she sensed this was going somewhere. He watches you, Hatchet said. I've known Ryan a long time. He watches you is different from the way he watches problems. He watches problems like he's calculating them, like he's already 3 steps ahead of what comes next. Hatchet set down his beer. He watches you like he's still figuring out the question. Like Ryan, that means something. Emma kept her expression neutral. Work here. Hatchet grinned, the disconnected grin. He picked his beer back up. I'm just saying, people in this room don't hand out their regard casually. You've got it, for keeps. When you haven't got it, you'll know. He paused. You've got it. She didn't know what to do with that exactly. But still, she filed it somewhere and picked back up what she'd been doing. And when Ryan returned 20 minutes later and took his stool without a word, then she found herself noticing that the quality of the silence between them was different from the silence of a month ago, that it had moved from assessment to something closer to accommodation, to the specific ease of two people who have decided, without discussing it, that they are going to be in the same room regularly and have stopped making that fact into a negotiation. The second time Daniel Whitmore made his presence known, it wasn't in person. It was a Friday, 3 weeks after his visit, and Emma was behind the bar during the lunch rush when her phone lit up with a call from an unknown number. She let it go to voicemail. 5 minutes later, the voicemail notification appeared. Checked it at her next break, stepping into the back where the sound of the bar was muffled. On the recording was not Daniel, not Daniel. It was a woman professional clipped reading from something that sounded prepared. Identified herself as representing a business consulting firm and said she was calling to follow up on a report that had been submitted regarding the establishment at this address, indicating potential irregularities in operating practices. And could someone authorized please return the call at the earliest convenience? Stood in the back of the bar and listened to the voicemail twice. Then she went back out to the bar and finished the lunch rush. Say anything to Marcus until the rush had cleared. Wait until it was manageable. And then she walked to his booth and set her phone on the table in front of him with the voicemail pulled up and said, "You need to hear this." He listened to it with the stillness he brought to things that required actual attention. When it finished, he set the phone down. His face was very quiet. Who would file a report? Emma said carefully. Send one to a business consulting firm about this specific address. It's not a question, Marcus said. No, it's not. He picked up the phone and listened to the message again. His eyes moved to Emma's face. Daniel Whitmore. He can't touch me directly. Locked him. He knows that coming here himself didn't work. He goes at the sides. She stopped, steadied herself. This is not the only call they'll make. He is thorough, and he is patient, and he has enough money to make this look legitimate for long enough to cause problems. Set the phone on the table. He turned it face down and went. He looked at Emma the way he had looked at her the very first day she had come in about the sign, with the same level of attention that stripped away everything irrelevant. What does he want? He wants me to come back, she said. He wants to take away the reason I wouldn't. The bar was quiet around them. The noon crowd had thinned. Ryan was at the bar and had not looked up. But the set of his shoulders told Emma he was listening. Care about something, Marcus said. His voice was still even, but there was a current underneath it, that she could feel the way you feel a change in air pressure. The bar has been standing for 22 years. It has been investigated by people with a great deal more resources than a business consulting firm on a rich man's payroll. We have nothing to hide because we stopped doing things that needed hiding a long time ago. He picked up his call. He files, will answer. Whatever he sends, will address. He met her eyes. And you will not lose this job because some man with a grudge made phone calls. Throat tightened in a way she hadn't expected. She pressed through it. I don't want to bring trouble here. Bring trouble here. Trouble followed you. The difference. Marcus set down his coffee. He'd done this before. Has he does before? Used third parties to come at something you cared about? He thought about the job in Phoenix that had ended, that had quietly contracted. The landlord situation that had resolved in Daniel's favor. She had never been able to prove any of it. Yes, she said. He nodded slowly. He picked up his own phone, and made a call. When it connected, he said, Billy, I need a conversation. Free today? A pause. Good. I'll be there at 3. He hung up and looked at Emma. We have a lawyer, he said. The club's lawyer. He deals with exactly this kind of creative legal harassment. He'll know what to do. Marcus, I can't ask you to... I'm telling you what's going to happen. He said it with finality, but not unkindness. Back to work. This is being handled. She went back to the bar, at the edge of the counter for a moment, and breathed. Slid a glass of water down the bar to her, without a word, without looking up from his own drink, and she picked it up and drank it and set it back down. She said, I didn't do anything, he said. You did. He didn't answer that. But he didn't move from his stool either. And the presence of him there, solid and consistent and completely unalarmed, was the most steadying thing in the room. Week. Arrived wig with a Monday delivery that went exactly as it should. For the first time in Emma's experience at the Roadhouse, every item present, quantities matching, the new verification sheet she'd designed, checked, and signed, and filed in the proper folder rather than the miscellaneous drawer. And her call she'd made the previous Thursday, consolidating 2 redundant orders into a single weekly pull from a single supplier had already produced a savings that would compound quietly over the following months. Small things, practical things, the kind of work that didn't announce itself. Emma had learned that the work that didn't announce itself was usually the work that actually held things together. Hatchet came in on Wednesday with a bottle of something expensive in a paper bag and set it on the bar in front of Marcus without explanation, and Marcus accepted it with a nod that contained a whole conversation. And later Emma learned from Cliff the regular, who had no affiliation with the club and knew everything anyway, the way regulars always do, that the bottle was a thank you gesture for some assistance the club had rendered to Hatchet's brother-in-law. The landlord situation had been resolved in his favor with what Cliff described only as a very persuasive conversation. Didn't ask about the details. She understood by now that the world of Black Vulture Roadhouse operated on its own accounting system, one where debts were real and repayment was reliable and the currency was not money. She didn't fully understand all the rules. She understood enough. What she understood most clearly was that she was no longer on the outside of it. She was sitting at the bar on a Thursday afternoon late, the place mostly cleared out when Ryan sat down 2 stools over instead of his usual 4. And she registered the difference before she registered that she had registered it. Big Toasto. He ordered water. She poured it without commenting on the water, because they had established long ago that comments on the water were not required. Staying, he said. Not a question. I'm staying, she said. He picked up his glass. He set it down. You changed how the delivery goes. Recognized how the delivery goes. It was already there. You'd done it before. I know. Ryan turned his glass in a slow circle on the bar top. He was working up to something. She could tell. She waited. Inventory work you did. The vendor calls. The new ordering system. He paused. You did all of that in less than a month. I had spare time. He said her name, the way he said things when he wanted them to land clearly. Listen. She looked at him. His expression was direct in the way it got when he was done calculating and had arrived somewhere. I misjudged you. When you came in that first day, you were someone who needed the world to be simpler than it is. She held his gaze. I thought you were someone who had decided the world was exactly as complicated as it needed to be and didn't want anyone suggesting otherwise. Something moved in Ryan Walker's expression, the thing she had seen move there before, not almost a smile, but adjacent to it. To it this time. That's accurate, he said. He nodded. He picked up his water. He drank it. It just says, you're the best thing that's happened to the bar's finances in 6 years. Marcus is being generous. Marcus doesn't do generous with facts. He does accurate. Emma was quiet for a moment. It's the first time in a while that what I'm good at has mattered somewhere, she said. That someone wanted it, instead of just tolerating it. Ryan set down his glass. He looked at her with the expression that was deciding something. It matters here, he said simply. The bar was quiet around them. He sighed. The October light was doing something in the early evening hours that made everything look considered, intentional. Picked up her bar rag and went back to work. And somewhere in the back of her mind, the place that kept track of the things that were real. Not the things she hoped were true, not the things she was trying to believe, the things that had actually shown themselves. Something shifted, settled, found level ground. She was still standing. She was, maybe for the first time since she'd left Phoenix, with nothing, standing on something solid. On it, nothing. That was, in fact, exactly what she had walked in and asked for. She had asked for a chance to rebuild herself. She was beginning to understand that the rebuilding had already begun. The business consulting firm called 3 more times before Billy Chen made them stop. Was the club's lawyer, a compact, precise man in his early 50s who had been handling the legal affairs of Black Vulture Roadhouse and its associated interests for 14 years, and who had, then his own accounting, gone. A variety of creative legal harassment that money could purchase. He showed up at the bar on a Thursday morning with a leather briefcase and ordered out black coffee and listened to Emma walk him through what she knew about Daniel Whitmore for 45 minutes without interrupting once. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, has he ever put anything in writing to you directly? Texts, emails, letters? Texts. Before I blocked him, did you keep them? Screenshot everything. Before I blocked the number. Billy nodded slowly. Good instinct. He opened his briefcase and set a yellow legal pad on Marcus's table. Here's what's happening. He's retained a firm that specializes in what I'd call soft pressure campaigns. Nothing actionable. Nothing that rises to harassment under the statute. It's enough consistent friction to make a target uncomfortable enough to make the problem go away. It's a fairly sophisticated approach for a personal grievance. Fairly sophisticated person, Emma said. That's clear. Billy made a note. Reduced. The calls to the bar are designed to put the establishment on the defensive without giving us anything to respond to. Vague enough that a response validates the implied concern. The move is no response at all, which is what I've advised Marcus. He looked at her steadily. What I need to know is what he actually wants. Because this level of effort for an ex-girlfriend who moves cities is, let's say, disproportionate. Looked at the table. She had thought about this, thought about it a lot in the quiet of her apartment in the hours that were still too quiet. It's money, she said. When we were together, I helped him with some of the administrative side of his company. It's informal. I wasn't an employee. I wasn't paid. I organized things. I structured things. She paused. I organized enough to know things he'd rather. I didn't. Pen stopped moving. He looked at her. What kind of things? Exactly. I know. I saw documents that didn't add up in ways I didn't understand at the time. I wasn't looking for anything. I was just helping. Remember the feeling of something being off. She met Billy's eyes. And he's not sure exactly what I know. And he's not sure what I'd do with it. The silence at the table was different after that. More specific. Marcus, who had been sitting quietly across from Billy, set down his coffee. He's covering something. I think he's afraid of what I might remember, Emma said. And I think the easiest way to keep me from remembering it out loud is to make my life difficult enough that I'm spending all my energy on the difficulty instead of on thinking. Billy made 3 more notes. He capped his pen. I want you to write down everything you remember from that period. Whatever you saw, whatever felt off, whatever you can reconstruct. Filter it for relevance. Let me decide what matters. You do that? Yes, good. He closed his legal pad. In the meantime, the consulting firm has been advised, appropriate, channels one, that any further contact with this establishment will be treated as coordinated harassment and documented accordingly. Stop. He paused. He'll find another approach. People like this always do. But we'll be ahead of it. Walked Billy out and stood for a moment at the door. After his car pulled away, November air had turned genuinely cold, the kind that came down from the mountains and didn't negotiate. She pressed her hands into her jacket pockets and looked at the sky for a moment. She had told herself when she drove out of Phoenix, that she was getting out of his reach. She had understood, somewhere underneath that his reach was longer than geography could solve. She just hadn't known what to do with that understanding. So she had set it aside and focused on survival. She went back inside and sat down and wrote everything she remembered about Daniel Whitmore's business practices in a methodical page account that took her 4 hours and left her feeling scraped hollow in a way she recognized as the sensation of something necessary having been done. She gave the document to Billy on Monday and didn't hear anything further about it for 2 weeks. Those 2 weeks, other things happened. The bar's new ordering system produced its first full month of savings. Marcus reviewed the numbers with Emma and Ryan on a Wednesday morning and said only, "Good." But he said it with the particular weight that meant considerably more than the word. The vendor consolidation she had proposed was now fully implemented. Relationship with the new primary supplier, whom Emma had called personally, introduced herself, and negotiated with on the basis of volume commitment and payment reliability, was producing prices that the bar hadn't seen in years. The regular told her, in the unself-conscious way that regulars deliver information they consider obvious, that in 20 years of coming to Black Vulture Roadhouse, he had never seen the bar running this well. It was bad before, he added carefully, just always the feeling that it was running despite itself. Now it's running because of itself. Emma thought about that for a long time. Hatchett brought his wife in on a Friday night, a small, direct woman named Patricia, who assessed Emma in about 30 seconds and then said, "Hatchett says you stood in front of his boys without flinching when you first walked in." Bex that. So do I. She ordered a glass of white wine and then spent an hour talking to Emma about her daughter's school situation with the ease of a woman who had decided someone was trustworthy and was proceeding accordingly, and was at the bar that Friday, as he was most Fridays, and at some point during the evening, Emma noticed that the distance between his usual stool and the place she spent most of her time behind the bar had quietly contracted. 2 stools down from his original position, and she had moved slightly toward his end of the bar when she wasn't needed elsewhere, and neither of them had made a comment about this. She talked to her mother for the first time in 6 weeks on a Sunday afternoon, a call she had been putting off because her mother had liked Daniel, had been charmed by him in the thorough way he charmed people when he wanted something. A conversation where Emma had explained why she was in Arizona and no longer with him had been painful and incomplete and had left things unsettled between them. Her mother asked how the job was going. Emma said, "It's going well." Well, actually. Her mother said, "The bar? You're still at that bar?" Yes. A pause that Emma recognized as her mother, selecting carefully from the things she could say. "You safe there?" "I am. I genuinely am." Emma paused. "Mom, the people here, they've been more decent to me than most of the people I knew in Phoenix." The mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, in the smaller voice she used when she was setting something down that she'd been carrying, "I'm sorry about how things ended up, Daniel. I know. It looked different from the outside." Emma kept her voice even. It looked different. From the inside, too, for a long time. Then it worked. "That's how it paused. Are you right, really?" Emma realized, sitting on her bed, in her small apartment, with the inconsistent heat, that she could answer that honestly for the first time in longer than she could precisely identify. Getting there, she said. I think I actually am. Week of November arrived on a Tuesday that felt ordinary in every way until it wasn't. Was behind the bar during the morning. Lull the space between the delivery check and the lunch crowd where she usually caught up on administrative work when the door opened. And a woman walked in who was not a regular and was not the type Roadhouse usually saw at 11 on a Tuesday morning. It was somewhere in her late 40s, professionally dressed, with the specific posture of someone who had arranged this visit in advance and was carrying the weight of a purpose. Emma set down her pen. The woman looked around the bar. She looked at Emma. I'm looking for Marcus Callahan, she said. He comes in at noon. Emma said, is there something I can help? Rather wait, if that's all right. Coffee, please. Poured it and set it on the bar and went back to her paperwork, keeping the woman in her peripheral awareness, the way she had learned to keep peripheral awareness of most things in a room. 11:40, Ryan came in through the back. He paused. When he saw the woman at the bar, Emma watched him do the same rapid, quiet assessment. She'd seen him do a dozen times, taking in the details. He said, the posture, again, and the quality of the weight. He went behind the bar and poured himself water and stood near Emma. He said low, didn't give a name, asked for Marcus, and looked at the woman again. She's not from a firm, the way she's sitting. She's not professional errand nervous. She's personal nervous. Emma looked again. He was right. One's hands around the coffee mug were not the hands of someone executing a task. The hands of who had worked themselves to something, who had worked themselves up to something, and was trying to hold the courage in place. This arrived at noon and stopped when he saw the woman. And the stoppage was brief but complete, the specific pause of a man who has recognized something unexpected, covered in less than a second. He walked to the bar, he said. The woman looked up. Marcus, her voice was careful. I'm sorry to come without calling. I didn't know if I'd still come if I called first. He looked at her for a moment. He looked at Emma and Ryan in a way that communicated clearly without words. Picked up a cloth and went to wipe down the far end of the bar. Found a reason to be in the back. Emma couldn't hear the conversation. Tried to. She heard only the register of it, the particular cadence of a conversation between people who had a long and complicated history and were trying to navigate it with care. It went on for about 20 minutes. At one point, the woman's voice broke briefly, and Emma focused harder on the bar top in front of her. Marcus came behind the bar 20 minutes later. His face was very still. He poured himself coffee and stood with it and said nothing for a long moment. Waited. Her son is in trouble, he said finally. Emma specifically. Just to the air. The way people speak when they need the words outside themselves. Kid's 23. Got mixed up with some people in Tucson. Not our kind of people. The messy kind. He paused. Linda was married to someone I knew a long time ago. He's been gone 11 years. She's been handling things alone. Said, what's she asking for? Advice, information. She doesn't know who else to ask. He looked at his coffee. Come here, because they don't know where else to go. It's always been the truth of this place. Emma thought about a hand-painted sign on a doorframe. Wanted. 2 words, no qualifications. What are you going to do? She asked. I can, he said, and went to make a phone call. She was thinking about that, about the specific nature of a place that people came to when they had run out of other options. When Daniel Whitmore walked in on a Friday night 3 weeks later, and the whole balance of everything shifted at once. Felt him before she saw him. Spent 2 years in close proximity to the particular energy he carried, and whatever else, those something in her nervous system they had calibrated to his presence the way a fire alarm calibrates to smoke. She felt it first as a general wrongness, a change in the air of the room. He looked up. He was at the door. Same suit, different tie. Full handsomeness of a man who understood that appearance was an argument. He had someone with him this time, a man in business casual, who stood slightly behind and to the left and had the look of someone employed to be present rather than to contribute. Daniel's eyes found Emma immediately. He smiled, the practiced kind, the kind that had taken her an embarrassingly long time to understand was practiced, was full of Friday night crowd. Most of the regular tables occupied. The Hells Angels Club members distributed around the room in the organic way they distributed themselves when they were all there together. Hatchet at the long table with 4 others. 2 men Emma knew as Tex and Graves at the bar. At his stool, 2 down from where Emma was standing. Ryan had already turned around. Emma didn't move. She held the bar counter with both hands and breathed once, fully, and then she straightened up. Walked to the bar. He sat down on a stool at the far end, 3 seats from Ryan, and set his hands flat on the bar, the way a man sits down at a bar when he's decided to be there a while. Companion took the stool beside him. Emma, Daniel said, like a drink. You were asked to leave this establishment, Emma said. Her voice was level. She was proud of how level it was. And by the owner, that stands. I'm a member of the public, Daniel said pleasantly. This is a public bar. I'd like a drink. Ryan turned on his stool and looked at Daniel with an expression that was entirely flat and entirely clear. Daniel looked at Ryan. He processed him. He returned his eyes to Emma. You'd also have some information I think you'd want to have about the document you gave to a certain lawyer recently. His hands tightened on the counter. I know about the document, Daniel said, his voice conversational, as though they were discussing something unremarkable. I know everything you put in it. I want you to understand that what you think you saw is not what you saw. And before you take any action based on a misunderstanding, it would be worth your time to hear my explanation. You drove 8 hours to explain yourself to me, Emma said. Drove 8 hours because you matter to me. Whatever you think happened between us, I know exactly what happened between us, Emma said. Emma. He lowered his voice to the reason voice, the calm in the room voice. You're under a lot of stress in those years. You've acknowledged that. It affects how we remember things. And there it was. The specific move she had spent months learning to name. Frame. The gentle, reasonable suggestion that her own memory was not to be trusted. The problem lived in her perception rather than in his actions. He had been waiting, she realized. Not consciously, but somewhere underneath the surface of the past weeks, beneath the inventory work and the vendor calls and the quiet solidness of Ryan Walker, at the bar she had been waiting for this exact moment, the moment when she would hear that specific thing said to her face again and would have to discover or what she was going to do with it, No, she said. He blinked. He had expected more. He had always expected more when he made that argument, more defense, more explanation, more Emma trying to prove her own reliability and getting tangled in the attempt. She said again, my memory is, I know what I saw, you know what I lived, and I know exactly what you're doing right now. She held his gaze. Ask you to leave. That's the last time I'm going to ask. The bar had gone very quiet. Not the dramatic kind of quiet that announces itself. Organic kind. The conversations don't stop all at once, but simply cease. Everyone, one by one, as the attention of the room consolidates around one thing. Daniel looked around the room. He was reading it the way he always read rooms, calculating, assessing, identifying leverage points. When his eyes moved across Hatchet's table, across Tex and Graves at the bar, across the broader distribution of men in leather vests who were all, without apparent urgency, complete attention, honked. His eyes moved to Marcus, who had emerged from the back at some point and was standing near the hallway with his arms at his sides and the particular expression of a man who already decided what happens next and is simply waiting for the sequence to complete. Look back at Emma. The practiced smile had thinned considerably. You built yourself a little fortress here, he said. The pleasantness had dropped away, and what was underneath it was the thing she had always known, was underneath it the cold certainty of a man who did not like losing control of things he considered his. You think, this protects you, I think. Emma said carefully that I don't need protection. I need you to leave. The document you gave that lawyer, Daniel said, and his voice had changed again. Harder now. The pleasantness gone entirely. If that goes anywhere, you understand what it means. And you want. You understand what you'd be accusing me of. You'd be dragging yourself through that just as much as me. People would ask why you waited, why you helped me if you knew. Because I didn't know, Emma said. Not clearly. I was figuring it out the same way you counted on me being too off balance to figure it out. She took a breath. The room was absolutely still. And her companion, Daniel's who had said nothing this entire time, shifted slightly on his stool, a small movement that suggested he was reassessing the room and finding it less comfortable than anticipated, stepped forward from the hallway. He didn't raise his voice. Need to. Mr. Whitmore, he said, you were asked to leave this establishment in October. Request stands. I'm going to ask you to leave now. Daniel looked at Marcus. He looked at Ryan. He looked across Hatchett's table, where nobody had moved, but everybody's posture had changed in the specific way that communicated readiness without aggression. He was a smart man. That had always been true. He was smart enough to read this room accurately. He stood up, he straightened his jacket. He looked at Emma with the expression she had never been able to fully translate, the one that lived in the space between possession and genuine feeling. And she still, even now, couldn't be entirely certain which side of that line he actually lived on. Both. Maybe neither. Maybe that was precisely the problem. This isn't finished, he said to her quietly. For me it is, she said. For you too. I genuinely hope for you too. It's your choice, not mine. He left. His companion followed. The door closed. The room stayed quiet for a full 3 seconds. Hatchett said, somebody want to get me another beer. And the room exhaled, and conversations resumed. And the Friday night continued around Emma, a lot of water around something steady. Picked up her bar rag. Her hands were not shaking. It was new. Ryan was looking at her from his stool. Not the way he had looked at things in the beginning, not the careful watchfulness of a man who hadn't decided yet. He was looking at her the way you look at something you have decided about definitively, and the decision sits easy in you. Didn't wait, he said. When he started the reframe, didn't even let him finish. I've heard it enough times, Emma said. I know what it sounds like. I know where it goes. People still let it go where it goes, even when they know. Emma set her bar rag down. She looked at Ryan Walker and thought about what he was actually saying, not about Daniel, but about what it cost to name a thing while it was still happening to you. Letting it go where it goes for 2 years, she said. You're done paying that toll. Ryan nodded. It was a small nod. Simple. It was the nod of a man, acknowledging something he respects. And coming from Ryan Walker, who did not distribute respect casually, landed with the full weight of what it was. Sid came behind the bar and stood next to Emma and said, in the quiet voice he used when things were finished being dramatic and needed to be practical, Billy needs to know he came back. Call him tonight, Emma said. Good. Marcus picked up his coffee cup. He looked at it. He looked at Emma, and for just a moment, the careful practicality in his face shifted slightly. The way it shifted on rare occasions when he allowed something more to be visible. He handled that, he said. On your own, Emma said. Yourself, Marcus said. The room was just there when he went back to his corner booth. Emma stood behind the bar in the ordinary Friday night noise of Black Vulture Roadhouse and held what Marcus had said and understood slowly that he was right. She had done that. She had faced the exact thing that had hollowed her out over 2 years and had not flinched and had not run and had not been talked out of her own clear understanding of what was real. When she had just stood there and spoken and meant it. She had not known, walking into this bar 2 months ago, that this was what she was walking toward, and went still. She had known only that she was walking away from something she could no longer survive staying inside of. But she was beginning to understand that walking away from one thing and walking toward another are sometimes the same step, and that sometimes the family you find in the most unexpected places is the family that sees you clearly enough to show you what you've already become. The bar hummed around her. Hatchet's laugh from the corner, nursing his evening ginger ale. The jukebox doing something low and steady. 2 stools down, the glass in hand. Founds Peterson in the specific way he was always present, solid, Peterson, consistent, requiring nothing from her except her actual self. She picked up her bar rag. She went back to work. And somewhere underneath the work, beneath the noise, and the ordinary motion of a Friday night, something in Emma Carter settled into place, not dramatically, not with announced quiet finality of something that has found where it belongs and decided to stay there. It's not done with Daniel Whitmore. Billy's phone call would make that clear. What Daniel had implied about the documents, the careful threat folded inside the reasonableness, meant that whatever came next would be more direct, more deliberate, and considerably less deniable than anything that had come before. And when still, she knew that she also knew something else, something she was carrying in the steady place where her hands had used to shake and now didn't. She was not facing it alone, and she was not, any longer, the woman who could be convinced that she was. Billy Chen called Emma on a Monday morning, 3 days after Daniel's second visit, and the first thing he said was, "Don't panic." Emma thought, a terrible way to begin a sentence if you didn't want someone to panic, she said. "He's filed a civil complaint, one against you personally, not the bar." Billy's voice was measured, precise, the voice of a man who dealt in facts, because facts were the only currency that held value in his business. Alleges defamation. He's claiming that the document you gave me, which he's details knowledge of, contains false statements that damage his business reputation. Sat down on her bed. She pressed her free hand flat on her knee. He knows what's in the document. He knows enough to be specific about what he's disputing. Tells me either he has someone inside the legal system who gave him access, or Billy paused. The consulting firm he hired has been doing considerably more active information gathering than we initially assumed. When he can make it expensive and exhausting regardless of whether he wins. The point. He knows you don't have the resources for prolonged litigation. Counting on you, settling or recanting before it gets that far. Looked at the wall across from her bed. She had put up a small print she'd bought at the thrift store, landscape, mountains, and light, mostly because the wall had been bare, and bare walls made her feel like she hadn't arrived anywhere yet. My options. Option 1, you settle. Sign an agreement not to pursue any claims against him, and he withdraws the complaint. You do it your separate ways. Billy let a beat pass. 2, we fight it. The document you gave me is detailed and specific. If even a portion of what you remember is verifiable, it shifts from defamation to a potential fraud disclosure, and that changes the landscape considerably. And 3, there isn't a comfortable option 3. Barely is. He paused again. Emma, I want to be straightforward with you. You go to option 2, your life gets examined. Billy, his lawyers will dig into everything, your employment history, your finances, relationship with him, and credibility as a witness. Try to paint you as a disgruntled ex-girlfriend manufacturing accusations. It'll be unpleasant. He's been painting me as unstable for 2 years, Emma said. People I knew. To my own mother, I'm used to it. Used to it and living through it legally are different experiences. Emma was quiet for a moment. What does Marcus say? Pause on Billy's end. I talked to Marcus this morning. He said it was your call and he'd back whatever you decided. He also said, Billy cleared his throat. He said, and I'm quoting, that money can buy a lot of things, but it cannot buy what she has in that room. A man who has to use money to win a fight has already lost the kind of fight that matters. Closed her eyes briefly. Tell him I said, option 2, she said. She told Ryan that same evening. Not because she was required to. Not because he would have been hurt to be left out. She told him because over the course of the past month, he had become the person she wanted to tell things to. And she trusted that instinct more than she had trusted most of her instincts in recent years. She told him, at the bar, at closing, when the last customer had gone, and Marcus was in the back, and it was just the two of them in the winding down quiet of the place. She stood across the bar from him and laid it out plainly the complaint, the options, the choice she'd made. Ryan listened without interrupting. His water glass sat untouched in front of him. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. He filed against you personally, he said. Not the bar. Yes, because going after the bar puts him in the same room as Marcus legally. He keeps it contained to someone he thinks has less backing. Emma had thought about this. That's my read, too. Ryan picked up his water glass, set it back down without drinking. He's still thinking of you as isolated, as the person who left with nothing and has nobody. Wrong about that, Emma said. Ryan looked at her. Directly, he said. Very wrong. It was a simple statement. And Walker did not make simple statements carelessly. He held it. I'm going to need to take some time for legal meetings, she said. Won't affect the bar work. I'll make sure the ordering is ahead. Ryan said her name with a particular tone that meant stop managing this. You're not worried about the bar work. She stopped. Worried about you, he said. The bar work is fine. We're running it before. We'll cover whatever needs covering. He paused. That's not a thing you have to earn. He'd been about to say something practical and organizational, and the thing he said instead caught her somewhere unguarded, in the place where she still flinched when people offered things without conditions. He felt the flinch happen and worked through it and said, simply, thank you, Mayan. Ryan nodded. He picked up his water glass and actually drank from it this time. And when he set it down, the set of his jaw and the steadiness of his expression were the things Emma carried home with her that night. The thing about going to war with someone who had more money was that it required you to be smarter, faster, and more organized than money alone could purchase. Understood this. She had spent 3 years working in the administrative engine of a small architectural firm which had taught her more about how documentation wins arguments than any law school could. She spent the first week after Billy's call building the most organized evidentiary file she was capable of constructing, not as a lawyer, because she was not a lawyer, but as the person who had been there and remembered it and could present what she remembered in a form that made Billy's work easier. He constructed timelines. She cross-referenced dates with what she could verify her own emails from that period. When still in an old account she hadn't used since Phoenix records. The fragments of professional correspondence that had survived her departure. Identified 3 specific transactions in Daniel's business records that she had handled administrative documentation for, and which, when placed in the timeline she had built, she told a story that the individual pieces had not. The file to Billy on a Thursday afternoon. Watched him, read through it with the focused attention of a man who was recalibrating something in real time. You built this yourself, he said. Not a question. In a week. I had the evenings. He turned another page. He went back to a previous page. He set the file down and looked at Emma with an expression she hadn't seen on his face before. This is extraordinarily organized, he said. The timeline alone. He paused. This is the kind of documentation that changes the nature of a case. Is it enough? It's enough to make his defamation complaint look very ill-advised. It'd be enough to prompt a conversation from his side that they'd rather not have. Billy picked up the file again. These transactions, you personally handled the paperwork. Organized it. I filed it. I'm in the administrative chain on those documents. Of course he knew that. And he filed the complaint anyway. Billy was quiet for a moment. He's either very confident or he made a misticulation. Confident, Emma said. He's always confident. He counted on me not being organized enough to do this. He counted on me being scared enough to settle. She paused, counting on a version of me that doesn't exist anymore. Billy Chen looked at Emma Carter the way people look at something they're revising their understanding of. You're going to make a call, he said. Before I do anything with this file, I'm going to make a call to his legal team. Quietly, just to let them know the nature of what we have. He capped his pen. Give it 72 hours after that call before you hear something very from his direction. Stood up. She picked up her bag. She looked at Billy steadily. Whatever happens, she said, I don't want a settlement that includes a non-disclosure. That might cost me. But I'm not going back to silence. held her gaze. Understood, he said. That's on the record. He left his office and stood on the sidewalk outside and breathed in the December cold and thought about silence. Saint about how it had been the thing Daniel had always needed most from her. Not love, not loyalty, but silence. The specific silence of someone who could not or would not name what they had seen. One, given it to him for 2 years. She had given it in the form of uncertainty, of self-doubt, of the endless, exhausting internal negotiation of a woman who had been taught to question whether her own clear perception was reliable. She was done negotiating with herself. 2 hours played out in 60. Billy called on a Saturday morning. His lawyers reached out, he said. They want to discuss resolution. Resolution, Emma said. Not settlement. They used the word resolution. In my experience, that means they're nervous, and they don't want to say settlement, because settlement implies they're moving toward the plaintiff. They want to know what you want. Sat with that for a moment. The power of being asked what you want by people who had spent 2 months trying to make you not want anything was not a small thing. The complaint withdrawn, she said, without condition. No non-disclosure, no admission of anything from my side that could be used to characterize the document as false. She paused. And I want to keep the document. You want to keep the document. You want Billy Chen to keep the document in whatever form is appropriate. I want it to exist somewhere that I can point to if I ever need to. Silence on the line for a moment. You're asking for assurance that he can't make this disappear. I can work with that. Another pause. Emma, what you're describing means he's not getting anything in return. Silence. No document destruction. No acknowledgement that you might have been wrong. He's not going to like it. He doesn't have to like it. Decide if he likes it better than the alternative. She paused. You told me the document changes the nature of the case, what the alternative looks like. Billy made a sound that might have been the laugh of a man who didn't often permit himself visible satisfaction. I'll communicate your terms, he said. Give me 24 hours. The answer came in 22. Complaint withdrawn. Conditions attached to Emma's side. The document remained with Billy, properly recorded. Daniel's legal team did not call it a settlement in any of the paperwork. Emma understood was how they were going to explain it to their client as a strategic withdrawal. He kept abrasion, everyone, as anything except what it was. In the plain language that Emma preferred, listen, he had tried, and she had not moved, and he had stopped, he told Marcus in his corner booth on a Tuesday morning, the same corner booth where she had first sat across from him and told him her honest answer to why she wanted the job. Him simply, in plain words, the same way she told most things now that she had remembered how. He listened. He nodded once at the end. He picked up his coffee. He said, that's all? Good? What else do you want me to say? Almost laughed. I don't know. Something bigger. Just looked at her over his coffee cup. I told you. When he came back the second time, that he had already lost. The kind of fight that matters. It means it's finished. Good means you can stop spending energy on it. He set his cup down. Did building. That file. Listen. Standing your ground, everyone. Deciding what you would and wouldn't give. That's not nothing, Emma. It's also not the thing I'm most impressed by. She looked at him. What are you most impressed by? That you walked in here 3 months ago with nothing, and you built something real while all of that was happening around you. He gestured toward the bar, the clean organization of it, the running order, behind the counter, the system that had been nothing 3 months ago and was now something. I've seen people under pressure collapse inward. I've seen people get through pressure by going numb. You did neither. He paused. You stayed present. You stayed useful. You kept building while the building was under fire. He looked at her with the directness that was his particular version of warmth. It's not a common thing. Emma looked at the bar she had reorganized, folder on the counter, that held the new vendor agreements she'd finalized last week, clean surface, and the properly stocked speed rack, and the accounting system that was now 3 months ahead of where it had been when she arrived. She thought about all of that having been done alongside everything else, alongside blocked phone numbers and legal consultations and the specific ongoing labor of not letting fear run the operation, she said. You had people who believed you could do it, Marcus said. You did it. He stood up and went behind the bar to pour more coffee, and Emma stayed in his corner booth for a moment by herself, in the worn, comfortable seat that was Marcus Callahan's seat, and that he had never once suggested she wasn't allowed to sit in. The week after the complaint was withdrawn, something else shifted in the texture of the bar that Emma couldn't have precisely named but could feel clearly. It wasn't dramatic. Nobody made an announcement. Nobody organized anything in her honor. It's not how Black Vulture Roadhouse operated, and she was glad for it, because that was not what she needed. What she needed and what she got was subtler and more substantial than ceremony. Hatchet saving her. The corner of the long table when the whole group came in on a Thursday, pulling out the chair beside him before she'd even come around the bar, as though it had always been her chair. Tex bringing in a container of tamales his mother had made and setting them on the bar with there's enough for everybody. And then looking at Emma specifically when he said everybody. Graves, who was not a man who used many words on a good day, setting a hand briefly on her shoulder when he came in Tuesday evening and saying, only heard you handled your business before going to his usual stool. Patricia Hatchett's wife, stopping in on a Wednesday afternoon specifically, not for a drink, just to sit at the bar and talk to Emma for an hour about her daughter's school situation and the landlord dispute she was in the middle of, and somewhere in the middle of that conversation saying, without preamble, you know you've changed this place since you've been here. Emma looked at her. I organized the inventory system. Patricia gave her the look that wives of large, complicated men develop, the look that has absorbed much reality to have patience for deflection. I'm not talking about the inventory system. I'm talking about the way these men talk about this place now, about what it is. She picked up her coffee. Hatchett has been riding with Marcus for 15 years. He comes home from that bar and talks about it like it's a job he goes to, like it's just a place. She set the cup down. Last month he started talking about it like it's something worth being proud of. What changed? Emma didn't answer. You know what changed, Patricia said. Don't have to be modest about it. Emma thought about this for a long time after Patricia left, about what it meant to change the feeling of a place, whether you could change the feeling of a place simply by showing up honestly to it, doing real work, treating the people in it with the same respect you wanted back. Not for the first time that she had walked into Black Vulture Roadhouse expecting to survive it. She had not expected to belong to it. She had not expected to matter to it. Here was Patricia telling her she did. Here were Texas Tamales and Graves's hand on her shoulder and Hatchett's chair. Marcus saying, that's not a common thing, with the particular directness of a man who didn't say things he didn't mean. It was Ryan Walker. The shift between her and Ryan was gradual enough that she couldn't have pointed to a single moment, and fast enough that one day she looked up and realized she had not been measuring it as a shift for a while, because it had simply become the way things were. He was there when the bar was open and often when it wasn't. He had developed a habit of arriving before the delivery on Mondays and leaving after close on Fridays. And on the days between, his presence had the quality of something that had always been there. From 4 stools down to 2 stools, down to the stool directly across from where Emma spent most of her time, and they had not discussed migration and did not need to. He had started telling her things, not large things, not at first, and small things. The way he'd grown up in pieces, a father who worked construction, a mother who had died when he was 17, trajectory through early adulthood that had been more survival than plan, until he'd found the club and found in it the structure he'd been operating without. These things in the way. He did most things without embellishment, without apparent need for a specific response, simply placing them in the air between them as facts that she could do with as she chose. She understood, because she knew him by now, that this was Ryan Walker's version of openness, a man who had spent the better part of a decade keeping the distance between himself and outsiders at a very specific width. This incremental narrowing was as significant as anything she had seen from anyone. She told him things back, her own pieces. The architectural firm and what she had loved about the work before it had become tangled with Daniel, the way her mother had taught her to keep records. Her mother, who kept every receipt in a little accordion file, who balanced her checkbook to the penny, who had passed to Emma the specific comfort of a number that added up. College and the friend she'd had there who'd mentioned Ridgecrest once in passing in a conversation neither of them had thought was important. That friend, Ryan said. One evening in December when the bar was quiet and they were talking in the particular easy way they talked when they weren't consciously doing it. She's why you came here. She mentioned it once. I even think she'd remember saying it. Do you still talk to her? She was one of the friendships that narrowed. Emma looked at the counter. The Daniel years. He liked people to come through him. The ones that didn't were inconvenient. Ryan was quiet for a moment. Isolated you, methodically, without appearing to. She paused. The thing that messes with you later is that you can't point to a single moment when he did it. There's no scene, no confrontation, just gradual. Just a slow rearrangement of your life until one day you look around and you're standing in the middle of something you didn't build and you don't know the way out. Ryan turned his water glass in a slow circle. But you found it. On a direction, Emma said. I already told Marcus that's all it was. Ridgecrest. Ridgecrest. And a help wanted sign on a door that I walked past 3 times. When Ryan looked at her, he had the direct expression that meant he'd decided something. I'm glad you walked in. It was 5 words. From Ryan Walker, 5 direct words about something personal constitute a significant statement. Held them the way you hold something fragile and valuable. Glad too, she said. He picked up his water glass, up her bar rag. The bar hummed around them, and outside, the December dark had settled, and inside everything was warm and ordinary and exactly what it was. Thought that ordinary had never been something she valued correctly until she had spent enough time in its absence. Christmas season arrived at Black Vulture Roadhouse the way Christmas arrived everywhere, slightly ahead of schedule and with variable enthusiasm. But what was different about this particular December was the quality of what Emma felt inside it. She'd been here before the holidays, alone. The specific loneliness of a December that had no home shape to it, no particular place to go that was hers. December after leaving Daniel had been the worst of it. She had spent Christmas Day in her Ridgecrest apartment eating a meal she'd cooked from scratch, not because she wanted to, but because cooking required enough focus to crowd out the other thoughts. This December was different, as mentioned. Marked without making it an event. The bar would do a Christmas gathering on the 23rd for the club and whoever else considered themselves part of the Roadhouse family. And he mentioned it in a way that included Emma without specifying the inclusion, because the inclusion was simply assumed. Brought Patricia and their daughter 16 teen, quiet, with her mother's direct gaze transplanted onto a teenager's architecture. Her daughter's name was Maya, and she sat next to Emma for most of the evening and asked detailed questions about the financial management of a small bar with the interest of someone who was thinking about business. Answered every question fully, treated her like the intelligent person she clearly was, and spent an hour drawing simple diagrams of inventory flow on a napkin that Maya folded up carefully and put in her jacket pocket. Patricia watched this from across the table and said nothing, but her expression said everything. Linda, the woman who had come in about her son back in November, came that evening with the son in question, a thin young man named Cal, who carried himself with the specific posture of someone who had recently been through something and was still deciding what it had made him. He sat quietly beside his mother and ate the food that had been laid out, and at some point ended up in a conversation with 2 of the younger club members that lasted an hour and a half and left him looking lighter than he'd looked when he arrived. Didn't know exactly what arrangement had been made for Cal, and she didn't ask. Because she had learned that the workings of the help that came out of this place were not always her business to know. She knew only that Linda had come in with nowhere else to go, and Marcus had said, "What I can," and apparently what he could had been enough. Came every week, as he came every weekday. He sat in his usual spot and ate his club sandwich and drank his ginger ale and told a story about his wife that made the table nearby go quiet. And then, for a moment, not made two of the larger men in the room laugh in the surprised way people laugh when something catches them off guard by being exactly true. Sat beside Emma for most of the evening. Not pressed close, not public in any way that required acknowledgement. Beside her, in the way they had been moving toward for months. His shoulder near her shoulder, the ease of it. At some point in the evening late, when the gathering had settled into the comfortable looseness of people who have been together long enough that the edges of formality have dissolved, Marcus raised his glass, standing up or making a production of it. One just raised it toward the room and said simply, "To this." Everyone in the room who had a glass raised it. In the slightly ragged, unsynchronized way of a real toast rather than a performed one. Raised hers, yent. He looked around the room. At Hatchet and Patricia, at Maya with her folded napkin, Golden Cal, and Linda and Cliff and Tex and Graves, and the dozen others who had become, for 3 months, the specific geography of her daily life, and she thought about the sign on the door. Wanted. On. The thing she had walked toward when she had nothing left to walk toward. She had come here to survive. She had found something she hadn't been looking for because she hadn't known it existed in this form, in this place, among these people. Found people who did not need her to be less than she was. People who needed her to be exactly what she was, used the specific things she was good at, and trusted the specific way she saw things and had, without ceremony or announcement, rearranged to include her the way you rearrange to include something that belongs. Ryan leaned slightly toward her, not much, just a small adjustment of someone making space for a quiet word. He said. Emma looked at him. "Yes," she said. And then, because it was true, and because she was done with the habit of minimizing true things, better than all right, he nodded. He settled back. His shoulders stayed close to hers, moved around them. Conversations layering, again, arriving in unexpected places, the bar, doing what the bar did, which was hold people and let them be held without requiring them to perform the being held. Side. The December night was cold and clear, and inside was warm. Carter sat in the middle of everything she had built by showing up and staying and working and refusing. Day after day, to be smaller than she actually was. She had not been saved. She had been given a chance, and she had made it into something real. It came in cold and unapologetic. The way January arrives in the high desert without transition, without softening. Just a hard line between what had been and what was now. Arrived at Black Vulture Roadhouse on the second Monday of the new year to find a water pipe had burst over the weekend in the back storage area, soaking 2 weeks of dry goods and warping the lower shelf units. This was already there when she arrived. Ryan was there. Hatchet had shown up with 2 other club members because Marcus had made a single phone call, and that was how things worked. Stood in the storage area and looked at the damage and made a list in her head before she opened her mouth. She said, "The dry goods are a total loss. We need to pull the damaged shelving before it warps the floorboards. Insurance claim needs to be filed today because there's a 48-hour window on water damage, and we need an emergency order from the supplier to cover what we've lost before the Wednesday lunch crowd." Everyone in the room looked at her. Marcus said, "Do it." She did it. She spent 4 hours on the phone, the insurance company, the supplier, the shelf contractor Marcus used who owed him a favor, and moved the job to Tuesday. Rebuilt the inventory sheet from her own records because she had, over the past 3 months, developed the habit of keeping a running backup because it cost nothing and had already saved them twice before. Early afternoon, the claim was filed. Emergency order was confirmed. Repair was scheduled. Ryan found her at the bar at 2 o'clock, eating a sandwich she'd made herself because she hadn't stopped long enough to eat before that. He sat down across from her. He looked at her for a moment, with the expression that had become familiar, the one that was direct and decided and made no performance of being either. Ran a crisis response, he said. I ran a Monday, she said. She looked up from her sandwich. You didn't panic, he said. You assessed, you prioritized, you executed the whole thing. He paused. He watched Marcus run situations like that for 20 years. The speed you moved at, that's not something most people have. She set her sandwich down. I grew up with a mother who balanced her checkbook to the penny and kept every receipt in an accordion file. Organization is the closest thing I have to a native language. It wants more than organization. Ryan leaned forward slightly, both elbows on the bar. You came in here 3 months ago with $40 in your account and a story you didn't want to tell. You rebuilt the ordering system. Everyone. You cleaned up 6 years of vendor drift. Everyone. You faced down Daniel Whitmore twice in this room. Everyone. You built a legal file that made his lawyers back down. And today, you managed an emergency claim before noon. He held her gaze. You understand what that is? She looked at him. She felt was not pride. Exactly, pride was too clean, too uncomplicated. Something more layered. Something that had gratitude in it and grief in it. And the specific ache of recognizing yourself in a mirror after a long time of not being able to find your own face. Starting to, she said, February. Brought something Emma had not anticipated. People who were not regulars, not club, affiliated, not anyone she recognized, to come in specifically because someone had told them to. Cal Linda's son, who by February had found steadier footing through whatever arrangement Marcus had quietly facilitated. He came in on a Thursday with a friend, a young man around his age who had, by Cal's minimal description, some employment problems and housing instability, and a general situation that needed untangling. The friend sat at the bar and drank a Coke because he wasn't drinking these days, which Emma registered without commenting on, and by the end of an hour, he had spoken to Marcus briefly and left with a handwritten phone number and the particular expression of a man who had arrived desperate and was leaving with something to hold on to. Watch this. And said nothing about it. The following Thursday, there were 2 others. Not young men in crisis. One was a middle-aged woman whose husband had left. Another was an older man who needed work and had heard from somewhere in the network of Ridgecrest's connected community that Black Vulture Roadhouse was a place that dealt in plain talk and practical help rather than forms and waiting lists. He handled each of them in his particular way. Direct, brief, without theater. Stenskerson, pointing where he could, connecting where he was able. What Emma understood, watching this happen over several weeks, was that the bar had always been this kind of place. The reputation she had been warned about before walking through the door, the reputation that made people tell her, not to go in, was a reputation built on the surface reading of leather, vests, and rough history, and that underneath it, when the actual work of the place had always included this. She mentioned it to Cliff on a Wednesday afternoon. Cliff, who had been coming since before she existed and knew the history of the place the way you know the history of somewhere you've put 20 years of your life into. Always been like this? She asked, the people coming in who need something. He looked at her with the mild expression of a man for whom this question had an obvious answer. Since Marcus took it over. Since before that even, back when the previous owner had it, he picked up his ginger ale. Like this exist because regular places failed somebody. The people who run them understand that, so they don't turn away people who've been failed. He paused. Vests scare off people who'd make it complicated. Who need real help don't care about the vests. I thought about that for the rest of the day. The twist that February brought came not from outside, but from inside, and Emma didn't see it coming because she had been looking in the wrong direction. The Tuesday evening, not particularly busy, and Billy Chen came in. On business, she could tell from how he was dressed, more casual, and from the fact that he ordered an actual drink rather than coffee, the bar, and made small talk with Emma for a few minutes, and then said, with the careful naturalness of someone who has rehearsed being casual, have you thought about what you want to do long term? I looked at him. I'm doing it. You're bartending and doing back office work for a bar in Ridgecrest, Arizona, Billy said, which is valuable, which you're doing well. He turned his glass slightly. I'm also aware that you have a skill set that is Emma, the file you built for the Daniel case. Timeline. The cross-referencing, the evidentiary organization. I've been practicing law for 26 years, and I have had paralegals with 5-year credentials who could not have built that file. He looked at him steadily. What are you saying? I'm saying I'd like to hire you. He held up a hand before she could respond. Time to start. Administrative and investigative documentation for the firm. You'd keep your hours here. Marcus knows I'm having this conversation. We've spoken. Be in addition to, not instead of. He paused. Pays significantly better than bartending. Emma set her bar rag down. Signed calm. She looked at the bar top. She thought about the accordion file her mother kept. About the 12-page document she had written at her kitchen table about a man she had been trying to escape. About the legal timeline she had built in a week that had made a practiced lawyer revise his understanding of what was in front of him. She said, not defensively, just plainly. Because you're exceptional at it, Billy said with the same plainness. Because exceptional is rare enough that when I see it, I don't ignore it out of convention. She thought about what Marcus had said, that convention was not the same as correctness. Between what people assumed about a place and what the place actually was could be wide enough to hold 22 years of real work. Think about it until Friday, she said. Billy nodded, up his drink. Take the weekend if you need it. She didn't need the weekend. She had her answer. By Thursday morning, it was yes, though, with the single condition that her hours at the bar remained protected. Not because she needed the money from both, though that was true because she was not leaving Black Vulture Roadhouse. Was not leaving the place that had held her while she rebuilt. It's not a negotiable point. Billy said that was entirely workable and they could start the following Monday. He told Marcus Thursday afternoon. He listened. He nodded. Good, then. After a pause, Billy's been needing someone like you for years. When he just had to wait until you showed up. Emma said, you told him to offer me the job. He looked at her. I told him he'd be a fool not to. He picked up his coffee. Different. March arrived, and with it, something that Emma had been aware of building for weeks and had been choosing not to name, because naming things before they were ready to be named was a way of losing them. March arrived, and Ryan Walker asked Emma to have dinner with him, not at the bar. Not a working meal, he winced, but dinner at a restaurant across town that neither of them had been to, 7 on a Saturday, when neither of them had anywhere to be after. Asked her on a Wednesday. He did it the way he did most things, plainly, without construction, standing beside her at the bar at close. Night, he said, are you free? She said, yes. Dinner? She said, yes. He nodded. He went and got his jacket. She stood there for a moment behind the bar and felt something warm and uncomplicated moving through her. Recognized it. Zint, for a moment. Not in a straightforward happiness, the kind that doesn't need explanation. The kind that arrives in its own plain clothes and stands there being exactly what it is. The dinner was good. The restaurant was the kind of place that did simple fellows, that did simple things without making a production of it. Everyone had come to understand precise preference in most things. They sat across from each other for 3 hours and talked not about the bar, not about Daniel, not about Billy's firm or inventory systems or vendor negotiations. They talked about books and about the high desert in spring and about Ryan's brother, who lived in New Mexico and raised cattle in a way that sounded simultaneously exhausting and exactly right, about Emma's mother's accordion file and the strange specific love it represented. Ryan told her about the ex-wife that Hatchett had mentioned once back in October. Her name had been Diane. It had ended because she had wanted a kind of life that the club made impossible, and he had not been willing to give up the club. And neither of them had been wrong about what they wanted. Without bitterness and without the particular performance of bitterness that people sometimes substituted for the real thing. He had loved her. It had not been enough. That was the whole story. Regret it? Emma asked. Ryan was quiet for a moment. Regret that it couldn't be different. I don't regret who I am. He looked at her across the table. I spent a long time after that being careful about what I let matter to me. It tells me his word was impossible. I'd say I was cautious. The difference? I'd like to think so. He looked at her with the direct expression she knew by now. I stopped being as careful sometime around October. It held his gaze. Around the time a woman walked in about a help wanted sign. On that time, he agreed. She looked down at the table for a moment, thought about the woman who had pressed her hands against stucco outside a bar and waited for her shaking to stop. The woman who had come back from 2 years of being told her own clear perception was unreliable and who had needed someone to simply not require her to be less than she was. She looked back at Ryan. I came in here broken, she said. I want you to know that. I know that. I don't want you to think. I'm unaware of how much this place, how much all of you were part of how I got here from there. You were broken, Ryan said. I also know that's not the same as being weak. I knew that by the second day. He paused. You were already working on it before any of us did anything. He stopped. Believed I could, Emma said. She nodded. She picked up her water glass and held it. She said, for not needing me to perform being okay. Waiting. I didn't wait, he said. I just watched you work. Came to Ridgecrest. The way. It came everywhere in the high desert, abrupt and vivid, the temperature shifting upward in a week, the quality of the light changing entirely. The bar's patio. The bars had been closed since November, and cleaned, and strung with lights that someone Hatchet's doing, suspected had arranged while she was at Billy's office one Thursday. Patio brought new customers. New customers brought a new kind of Saturday night, looser, layered, more layered people who had heard something about the bar from someone who had heard something else. When the specific word of mouth that can't be manufactured and can't be bought. Emma watched this happen and understood it the same way she had understood everything about this place, gradually from the inside. Black Vulture Roadhouse had not changed its fundamental nature. It had not rebranded. It had not targeted a new demographic or softened its image or made itself into something it wasn't in order to attract people who might be uncomfortable with what it was. It had simply run well, done what it did with integrity and competence. People. The rest had followed from that the way good things follow from solid ground. Revenue numbers for March, which Emma reviewed with Marcus on the first Monday of April, were the strongest the bar had seen in 6 years. Dramatically, not in the way that made for dramatic announcements, but solidly, consistently, the kind of numbers that meant the floor had risen and was staying risen. He looked at the sheet for a long time. He turned it over once, as though checking the back for something additional. It back. He set it down and said, 6 years. Your consolidation accounts for some of it. Waste reduction accounts for some of it. Mostly its volume. People are coming and coming back. Why are they coming back? Emma thought about it honestly. Because they feel something here. Because the place feels real. She paused. You can tell. People when something is being run by people who mean it. He looked at her. You mean it, he said. Whatever you built here, the system, the way you handle people, the way you kept working, when everything with Daniel was happening, you meant all of it. He folded the sheet once. People work here who were fine. Good, even. Were here because they needed a job. You're here because he stopped. Again, you came in here and you found something you could build, and you built it without being asked, without waiting for permission. He made a short gesture with his hand that meant everything he wasn't saying. You did the work. Emma thought about $43 in a checking account, about a help-wanted sign she had walked past 3 times, about the specific courage required to walk toward the thing you've been told to fear when the thing you've been told not to fear has already destroyed you. You gave me the chance, she said. You did the rest, Marcus said. The day that everything came fully into focus arrived on a Saturday afternoon in late April. Disguised. And it arrived in the form of a young woman Emma didn't recognize standing outside the bar looking at the door the same way Emma had stood outside it 7 months ago. was wiping down the bar and happened to look up at the right moment and see her through the window, late 20s, blonde hair, pulled back, that was too thin for the wind, line language, that was all the specific things, a body language, that was all the specific things that Emma recognized. The practiced stillness of someone trying to look less frightened than they were. The particular way the hands pressed flat against the sides when you needed them to stop shaking. Emma set down her bar rag. She went to the door and opened it. The woman looked up fast, the reflexive alertness of someone who had been in situations that required it. Said, "Do you need something?" The woman looked at her, at the bar behind Emma. She said, in a voice that was managing itself carefully, "There's a sign. Wanted." "I don't." She stopped. "I know what kind of place this is. You're told not to come in." Emma looked at her for a moment. She felt something move through her that was not quite like anything she had a clean word for recognition. Maybe, combined with the specific tenderness of someone who knows a particular territory intimately. Back from the doorway and held the door open. She said, "I'll get you some coffee." The woman came in. She sat at the bar. Her hands were pressed flat on the surface the way Emma had pressed her hands against every flat surface she could find for the first 3 months of her own rebuilding. Moved around the room and cataloged it, and gradually over the course of a cup of coffee and a few plain sentences from Emma settled. Grace. She was 26. The details she offered were sparse, and she offered them in the careful order of someone deciding in real time what was safe to say. And Emma did not push past what she offered because she understood the pace of that particular disclosure. "Sign," Grace said. "Is it still open? The position?" Looked at Marcus, who had come out of the back at some point and was standing near the hallway with a cup of coffee and the particular expression of a man who was watching something he recognizes. He looked at Grace. He looked at Emma. He said to Grace, "What's your name?" "Grace, why do you want to work here?" Grace looked at him. Fake. She looked at her hands on the bar. Then she looked back at Marcus and said, with the particular stripped quality of someone who has run out of energy for anything except the truth, "Because I need a chance to start over. That's all. That's the whole answer." The bar was quiet. Emma picked up her bar rag and went back to wiping the counter, and she did not look at Ryan, the one who was on his usual stool, Ethan, but she felt him look at her, and she knew from the quality of silence that he was feeling what she was feeling, the specific recognition of a circle completing itself, of something being passed forward. Said to Grace, "You work hard. You respect what we've built here. You don't ask about things that aren't your business." He picked up his coffee. "Those are the rules. You want the job?" Grace said. "Yes," said. "You start Thursday." Grace let out a breath, the kind that had been held in too long and needed the length of the release to account for everything it had been carrying. Went to the back and got a plate and a sandwich and brought it out and set it in front of Grace without being asked, because she remembered what it was to be that hungry and too proud to show it. And she said something. And Grace looked at her, the son, with the eyes of someone receiving something they hadn't prepared to receive. Grace said, "It's a sandwich," Emma said. "Thank me for a sandwich. Save the thank you for 6 months from now." He almost smiled. It was a small thing, incomplete, uncertain, but it was there. Hatchet, from his table where he had been watching all of this, one said to no one in particular, "You go again." And his tone was not resigned, but warm. The warmth of a man who had watched something happen before and was glad it was happening again. After close, Emma stood behind the bar in the quiet that descended when the last customer was gone and stopped, and the door was locked when the ordinary sound of a working bar had settled into the particular piece of a place that has been used well for another day. Was at his stool. He had not left when the others left, which was no longer unusual and hadn't been for months. Looked at the bar, at what it was, at what it had been 7 months ago when she had first stood behind it, uncertain and shaking and carrying more than anyone in the room had known. He thought about the ordering system in the back office and the vendor agreements in the folder and the March revenue numbers and the new patio and Grace sitting down on a Saturday afternoon with her hands pressed flat against the bar. Bon. She thought about Daniel Whitmore, who was not in this room, and had not been in this room since November. And when Billy had quietly confirmed he'd moved his business operations out of Arizona entirely in January. The document remained with Billy, properly recorded, and what it contained had not been forgotten. It was ever formally used, was not something Emma spent much energy on. She had taken back her own testimony. She had refused silence. It ever came after. That was the world working through its own accountings. She thought about her mother's accordion file, and called her mother twice a week now in the conversation, where she had finally told her the whole truth, not the managed version, not the version designed to avoid her mother's distress, but the full actual truth had been hard and had been necessary and was behind them now, and what was ahead of them was better. She thought about Billy's firm, where she worked Thursday and Friday mornings, and had already 3 months in built a documentation system that Billy said was the most functional the firm had had in a decade. She thought about Ryan Walker, the one who was 2 feet away from her on his usual stool, the one, and who had taken her to dinner in March and again in April, and who had told her, the one, on a Tuesday evening 2 weeks ago, felt this certain of anything in a long time, and who had said it in the plain, ceremonious way. He said, everything true, the one. She had said she felt the same, the one. It had been the whole conversation, and it had been entirely sufficient. When she looked at him now. Do you ever think about the first time I came in? She asked. Ryan turned his water glass in the slow circle. Sometimes. He looked at her. Direct. I think I saw someone walk through the door who was more than what they looked like. And I watched for it because I've learned that what a person looks like in the worst moment of their life has nothing to do with what they are. He paused. You think I was right? Emma held that. She picked up her bar rag one more time and folded it, and set it on the bar and looked at the room around her, at Black Vulture Roadhouse, which she had been warned about and had walked into anyway, and which had become the geography of her actual life. She thought about what it meant to find the people who see you clearly, need you to be what you actually are, rather than something smaller or simpler or easier to contain. She thought about what it cost to stay in rooms where you were required to be less the specific invisible toll of it, paid in daily installments, adding up over years into a debt that bled you without announcing itself. She'd even say she had paid that debt and walked out and found her way here. She had asked for one thing, a chance to rebuild herself. When she had gotten something larger than she had known how to ask for, because she had not known standing on that sidewalk with $43, and a name she had half forgotten how to use without apology, that what she needed was not just a job or a place to stand or a legal resolution or a system or even a person who saw her correctly. What she had needed was to discover that the woman she had always been was still there. That 2 years of careful, methodical diminishment had not reached the place where she lived. The deepest room of her, and that given ground and time and people who required nothing of her except her actual self, come back to herself the way water finds its level. She had come back. She was here. Ryan Walker was on his stool 2 feet away, and Marcus had gone home an hour ago, and Grace was starting Thursday. The bar was quiet and real, and hers. In the way that places become yours, when you have poured work and honesty and the best of what you have into them. Carter picked up her keys. She turned off the lights over the bar. She walked to the door and held it open for Ryan, who stood from his stool and put on his jacket and came toward her with the unhurried ease of a man who is exactly where he intends to be. He looked back at the bar one last time, at the clean counter and the organized shelves, and the place on the wall where the help wanted sign had been. She had taken the job and Marcus had taken it down, and she felt clearly and without complication the thing she'd had driven 8 hours and scraped 8 months to find. She felt like herself, completely, solidly, undeniably herself, not despite everything that had happened, because of what she had done with it. When she closed the door, she had not been saved by this place or these people or this life. She had saved herself, and this place, and these people had been the ground beneath her feet while she did it. Fee can't be one. And that was the truest thing she knew. And it was enough. Everything. And it was everything.